Every Soviet soldier who stepped off a transport at Bagram in 1979 was equipped for mechanized warfare on the European plains. What he found instead was a decade of mountain ambushes and close-quarters compound clearances fought against an enemy that did not follow the doctrine. Some of that equipment failed immediately, some adapted. One weapon became the foundation that the entire Soviet infantry organized itself around. I have been researching everything the 40th Army actually carried. This is the complete ranking. Kicking off the list at number 15, the Makarov PM pistol. On a patrol in the Panjshir Valley in 1982, a Soviet lieutenant drew his Makarov during an ambush. The enemy position was 300 meters above him on a ridgeline. He held the pistol for approximately 4 seconds, then holstered it and reached for the rifle he had set down. He did not draw it in combat again that deployment. The Makarov PM was the standard Soviet officer sidearm, 9mm Makarov calibre, 8-round magazine, effective to 50 meters. In a war where contacts opened at 200 to 600 meters in terrain that eliminated close-range engagements as a default, the pistol was a psychological comfort object. Officers who understood the fight carried an AKS or a full AK instead. The PM came along as a badge of rank. Mujahideen who captured Makarovs traded them away. No use for a short-range pistol when rifles were available. That judgment is the most accurate assessment this weapon received in Afghanistan. Coming in at number 14, the RGD-5 fragmentation grenade. Private Alexei Morozov of the 345th Guards Airborne Regiment threw an RGD-5 during a contact in a narrow ravine in Kunar province in 1984. It hit a rock face, deflected back, and detonated 5 meters behind his position. He survived. His account appears in the Afghansi oral history collection. The RGD-5 was the standard Soviet fragmentation grenade, thin-walled offensive design, 3 to 4 second fuse, 5-meter lethal radius. On flat ground against a static target, it functioned as designed. In Afghan mountain terrain, steep angles and rock surfaces made it genuinely hazardous to the user. Soldiers learned to roll grenades uphill rather than throw them. The grenade did not adapt with them. Mujahideen recovered Dud RGD-5S, learned the fuse timing, and began moving after the throw. Afghan terrain had done most of the analytical work for them. Next up at number 13, the AKM. A conscript outside Kandahar in 1980 described being issued an AKM, while the soldier beside him received a new AK-74. He kept the AKM for 4 months before resupply arrived. He later said those months felt noticeably longer than the rest of his tour. The AKM was the 7.62 by 39 Kalashnikov variant, actively being replaced from the start of the Afghan deployment. A significant number of soldiers began the war with the older weapon. The heavier ammunition load mattered on foot patrols at altitude. The AKM was not defective. It was obsolete the moment the new rifle arrived. The Mujahideen preferred captured AKMs to many of their own weapons and used them throughout the war without complaint, an endorsement of a kind. We are leaving the disasters behind. What follows could actually function in Afghanistan. The problem is that function and fitness for purpose are not the same thing. Moving on to number 12, the RPG-18 Muka. A VDV sergeant later described the RPG-18 as an excellent weapon for destroying the tanks that never appeared. His patrol had carried 3 of the disposable launchers up a mountain pass in Badakhshan province in 1983, a 6-hour climb. They made contact with Mujahideen fighters positioned behind natural rock walls. The RPG-18 is not particularly effective against rock walls. They carried all 3 unspent launchers back down the mountain. The RPG-18 was a Soviet copy of the American M72 Law, a single-use 64mm AT rocket designed to defeat armored vehicles at close range. Against Mujahideen infantry in broken mountain terrain with no armor and no vehicle targets, it had almost nothing useful to do. It was issued because doctrine required individual anti-armor capability. The doctrine did not account for Afghanistan. When Mujahideen captured Mukas, they used them against Soviet vehicles. They found a more practical application than the issued doctrine had managed. Following that, at number 11, the DShKM heavy machine gun. Here is something that surprises most people when they look at this conflict closely. The DShKM was feared in Afghanistan not because of what the Soviets did with it, but because of what happened to the Soviet ones. A signals officer with the 5th Guards Motor Rifle Division watched a captured DShKM firing on a Soviet convoy near Jalalabad in 1981. The Mujahideen had taken it in a vehicle ambush the previous week. His memoir records one thought: a weapon that was supposed to protect us was now trying to kill us. The DShKM was a 12.7mm heavy machine gun dating to the 1930s, devastating at range and proven through every Soviet conflict since World War II. In Afghanistan it was heavy, vehicle-dependent, and captured in meaningful numbers in mountain road ambushes. And placed defensively, it was nearly unstoppable. Out in the field, it was a liability waiting to change sides. CIA supply records document how many DShKs the Mujahideen eventually received through external channels. The Soviets had already provided the most effective demonstration possible of what the weapon could do. Up next at number 10, the SPG-9 Kopya recoilless rifle. A crew from the 66th Separate Motor Rifle Brigade recorded in their unit log that they had carried the SPG-9 system and its ammunition up a 2,000-meter elevation change to support an operation in Nuristan province. The log does not record how long this took. It does record that the crew formally requested in writing not to be assigned this task again without vehicle support. The SPG-9 was a 73mm recoilless rifle, effective against vehicles and fortified positions to beyond 1,000 meters. When it reached its firing position, it was genuinely effective. Reaching the firing position was the entire problem. Units with vehicle access used it well. Units operating dismounted frequently left it behind. Mujahideen captured SPG-9s and used them. Soviet after-action reports document the weapon encountered against its original owners. The enemy agreed it was worth carrying. There is a pattern forming on this list worth naming. The weapons at the bottom are not bad weapons. Several of them are excellent weapons in other contexts. They are ranked here because Afghanistan was not the war they were designed for. That distinction matters more than the hardware. Moving into solid performer territory. These weapons earned genuine respect from the soldiers who carried them. Some of them earned specific respect from the enemy, which counts for considerably more. Now things start to get interesting. At number 9, the RPK-74, a squad automatic rifleman with the 180th Motor Rifle Regiment, described the RPK-74 as the weapon that meant his squad was never short of ammunition mid-contact. He and every rifleman around him carried the same 5.45 by 39 caliber. When the RPK ran dry and the fight continued, he took magazines from the nearest AK-74 carrier. He said this happened regularly and that the ability to do it changed his confidence in the weapon entirely. The RPK-74 was the squad automatic weapon variant of the AK-74 platform, 45-round magazine, bipod, longer barrel. It was not a true belt-fed machine gun and overheated under sustained fire, but ammunition commonality with every other rifle in the squad made it a practical choice in an environment where logistics were difficult and common caliber changed what was possible in a sustained contact. Mujahideen fighters found distinguishing the RPK-74 from the AK-74 riflemen around it genuinely difficult. Tactical anonymity was an unintended advantage the weapon provided at no additional cost. Coming in at number 8, the SVD Dragunov. Sergeant Yuri Fedorov of the 201st Motor Rifle Division is quoted in a Russian military history of the Afghan conflict describing a 2-hour sniping exchange near the Salang Pass in 1985. His opponent had been using a bolt-action weapon of British origin. Fedorov's SVD gave him a rate of fire advantage that ultimately decided the outcome. The SVD was the Soviet semi-automatic designated marksman rifle, 7.62 by 54 rimmed, effective to 800 meters with a trained shooter. PSO-1 optical sight standard. In terrain where range was the decisive tactical advantage and elevated positions were the default enemy location, the Dragunov was a genuine equalizer. Units with trained SVD operators reported meaningfully better outcomes in mountain contexts. Mujahideen actively targeted SVD carriers and specifically sought to acquire the rifles. A captured Dragunov was a significant prize. That specific individual targeting is a form of operational respect. Moving on to number 7, the AGS-17 Plamya automatic grenade launcher. A platoon commander from the 103rd Guards Airborne Division described the AGS-17 as the weapon that changed the geometry of an ambush. His unit had been pinned in a valley draw in Logar province in 1983, Mujahideen 400 meters above them behind rock cover. The AGS-17 team walked 30mm grenades over the ridgeline in an indirect arc. The contact ended within 90 seconds of the AGS engaging. The AGS-17 Plamya fired 30mm VOG grenades at 65 rounds per minute, effective to 1700 meters indirect. In Afghanistan, high-angle indirect fire at squad level was not a tactical feature. It was often the only means of reaching a position above the line of sight. Soviet tactical doctrine was formally revised during the Afghan deployment to incorporate the AGS-17 at company level. Mujahideen commanders in post-war interviews specifically named the Plamya as the weapon their fighters feared most in valley contacts. Following that at number 6, the NSV Utes. Do not let this placement suggest limited capability. A crew from the 66th Separate Motor Rifle Brigade emplaced an NSV Utes above the Kunar River Valley in 1986, covering a known Mujahideen transit route. The crew commander's account describes 3 engagements from that single position over 6 days. The Mujahideen stopped using the route below them. His description of the result: the NSV had made approximately 900 meters of valley floor uninhabitable. The NSV was a 12.7mm heavy machine gun, lighter than the DShK at 25 kilograms, effective to 2,000 meters against personnel and light vehicles. In a prepared defensive position with good fields of fire, it was virtually impossible to address from below. The weight remained significant in mountain terrain. In fixed positions, the performance was worth the cost. Mujahideen commanders cited the NSV in post-war accounts as a weapon that forced permanent changes to their route planning and movement patterns. Forcing an enemy to permanently redraw their movement map is a strategic effect, not a tactical one. We are entering the elite tier. These weapons did not just work in Afghanistan. They changed how the Soviet army fought, and in several cases changed how armies after them think about infantry combat. In the top 5 at number 5, the GP-25 Kostyur underbarrel grenade launcher. A VDV sergeant described receiving GP-25 launchers for his squad's AK-74S in Kandahar province in 1982 as the first moment he felt his unit was actually equipped for the fight they were in. His squad had been conducting compound clearances. A 40mm VOG grenade fired from beneath the barrel into a doorway solved problems that direct fire could not reach. The GP-25 was an underbarrel 40mm grenade launcher for the AK-74 series VOG, 2.5 grenades, effective to 400 meters, adding under a kilogram to the rifle. Giving every individual rifleman indirect fire capability at personal loadout level had not been part of Soviet doctrine before Afghanistan. The war created the requirement. The GP-25 answered it. Post-war, military analysts from multiple NATO countries specifically cited the GP-25's widespread Afghan adoption as a direct influence on their own procurement decisions. Every modern army's expectation that underbarrel grenade launchers are standard infantry equipment traces partly through this conflict. Coming in at number 4, the PKM. Sergeant Pavel Grishin of the 860th Separate Motor Rifle Regiment carried a PKM for 14 months in Badakhshan province. In a documentary filmed in 2007, he described it as the first weapon in his career he believed could end a firefight rather than simply participate in one. His crew used 200-round belts positioned on high ground whenever terrain allowed. Grishin said there were engagements where the PKM was the only reason anyone went home. The PKM was the Soviet general-purpose machine gun, 7.62 by 54 rimmed, belt-fed, effective to 800 meters, capable of the sustained fire that the RPK-74 could not match. Soviet squads in Afghanistan oriented their entire tactical movement around the PKM's position. The gun was the fixed point of the problem. Everything else arranged itself around it. The Mujahideen briefed their fighters to eliminate PKM gunners as the first priority in any engagement. When killing the man holding your weapon is the enemy's opening objective, your weapon has already made its case without assistance. Taking the bronze position at number 3, the AGS-17 I need you to understand something before I place this weapon here. The AGS-17 should not work. A 206mm barrel on a full-power rifle cartridge produces a muzzle blast that is genuinely disorienting to the shooter and everyone nearby. The ballistics are compromised against the full-length AK-74. Without hearing protection, it is punishing. Soviet soldiers called it the suitcase, the miniature, and several other names referencing its size. They also refused to give it up. A Spetsnaz operator from KGB's Alpha Group described the AGS-17 as the only weapon worth carrying when you do not know whether the next 10 seconds will require a rifle or a free hand. His unit used it across close target reconnaissance and direct action operations throughout the country. The AGS-17 was the ultra-compact carbine variant of the AK-74 folding stock 5.45 caliber issued to vehicle crews, helicopter crews, officers, and special forces In practice, it was carried by anyone who understood that Afghanistan's close quarters fighting rewarded something that could be brought to bear in a corridor, a doorway, or a helicopter door in under a second. Mujahideen fighters named it and made it a specific acquisition target after encountering it. The weapon remains in production globally today because the Afghan conflict proved exactly what a compact platform can do in environments where full-length rifles become a liability. In second place, and very close to the top, the RPG-7. A Soviet sapper attached to the 40th Army's engineering battalion wrote in his post-war memoir about watching a Mujahideen fighter fire an RPG-7 into a position that 3 of his colleagues had vacated 30 seconds earlier. He had studied the weapon in training. He knew its specifications precisely. Watching it used against him, he wrote, was the moment he understood that the weapon does not belong to the side that designed it. The RPG-7 was a reusable rocket launcher, PG-7 anti-armor round, effective to 300 meters against vehicles, longer range against area targets. The Soviet Army issued it to destroy NATO armor in Central Europe. In Afghanistan, it destroyed vehicles when it found them, but also cave entrances, mountain road convoys, compound walls, and infantry concentrations in open terrain. The RPG-7 discovered its own versatility in the field before any doctrine acknowledged what it had become. The Mujahideen took the RPG-7 and wrote the foundational manual on asymmetric direct fire against a conventional mechanized force. That manual has been reproduced by insurgent forces in every major conflict since. The weapon is currently in active service in more than 40 countries. Afghanistan amplified that legacy further than any other single theater in the weapon's history. But the absolute top spot on this list belongs to the AK-74. Private Nikolai Belov was 19 years old when he arrived at Kabul International Airport in January of 1980 with the early elements of the 40th Army. His issued weapon was an AK-74 chambered in 5.45 by 39 mm, a cartridge the Soviet Army had been fielding for only 4 years. Belov described his first combat engagement, an ambush in Parwan province, primarily in terms of the rifle rather than the situation around him. The AK-74 fired exactly when he asked it to, in conditions he would not have believed possible, and he said this simple, mechanical, absolute reliability was the foundation of everything else he did in Afghanistan. His account was recorded by a Russian journalist in 2003 and is cited in multiple histories of the conflict. The AK-74 was the primary Soviet infantry rifle throughout the entire Afghan deployment. 30-round magazine standard, reliable across the full range of Afghan temperature extremes and dust environments. The 5.45 round was designed to tumble on impact, creating wound channels disproportionate to the projectile's size. Mujahideen fighters called it the poison bullet. That was not a metaphor. It was a tactical assessment shared between fighters to explain the wound patterns they were encountering and to warn that minor hits from this caliber carried consequences that previous Soviet rounds had not produced. Beyond its own specifications, the AK-74 standardized caliber across virtually the entire Soviet infantry inventory. The GP-25 mounted under its barrel. The RPK-74 used its ammunition. The AKS-74U was built on its action. Every other weapon on this list organized itself around the AK-74. It was not just the best weapon a Soviet soldier carried in Afghanistan. It was the weapon that the entire infantry platform was built on top of. Post-war, NATO intelligence assessments of the AK-74 were extensive and complementary in ways that official Soviet sources would have found satisfying. The 5.45 wound ballistic profile was formally analyzed and documented. Several NATO members accelerated their own small-caliber rifle programs in direct response to what the Afghan conflict had demonstrated. The most thorough endorsement the AK-74 ever received came from the people who spent a decade on the wrong end of it. What this ranking reveals is an army learning in real time that the right weapon in the wrong war is still the wrong weapon, and that the ones which survived that discovery did so by being adaptable in ways their designers had not entirely planned for. The AK-74 passed every test Afghanistan could produce. If you have a case for a different number one, or a weapon I left off this list, put it in the comments.